Well, good morning. I decided this week that I probably need to get my head examined. And I think some of you are like, you're only realizing that now. But so Trevor and I are talking about the series, and we were talking about how a treadmill is such a great picture of what happens with this hustle that we have been talking about since Easter. And it struck me that the treadmill is a horrible invention. I mean, it's just like everything about it really strikes as if it came right from the pit of hell. And I can't think of a worse implement. Like maybe I thought maybe the Stairmaster, but even there, it's like you can still be strolling at least. But the goal of the treadmill is to run faster and faster and faster and still get nowhere. And it feels a whole lot like how many of us experience life. But the part that really got me was I started looking up on the internet. I started looking up fails, like treadmill fails, and I found them really funny. And so I think this is the part where I thought maybe I need to get my head examined. But at least he's still smiling about it. This looks like a nice, fun interview, but you really got to watch the guy in the back. But don't worry, we'll zoom in to make sure you get to see it again, because, that's the way it really mattered. Bam! Oh. So there's a little desperation in this one. Like, I got it. Uh-oh, wait, I'm stumbling just a little bit. Wow! But I got to look at the face here. Oh, now this guy has got it going. He is rock and roll. Now behind him is his buddy, and this is what it feels like. It feels like next to you is someone who's making it go higher and faster. And this guy, the only answer to that, higher and faster, is run faster. And this is how I like to imagine that I'm running the race of life. He's off, he's doing good. This guy, boom, that's how I'm actually running the race of life. And so we're in this series. We're teaching about the hustle and how the hustle is actually coming straight from hell. And you got to look at the old messages and review those if you want to catch up to kind of some of the principles that we've been talking about here. But I can't help but feel like a hypocrite when I come to talk to you about these things, because I'm addicted to the hustle. Like, this is who I am. This is what I love. In fact, there's a part of me that really feels like people that aren't hustling, they need like a little swift kick in the butt. Because I mean, this is like confession. They're good for the soul. Because I'm like, why would you not hustle? I don't even understand what would possess a person to live life in such a way that they're not hustling. And so there is some hypocrisy that comes with me trying to talk about this with you. But I also feel like I have learned a few things along the way. And maybe I can help, some other addicts here with some of the lessons that maybe we've started to learn along the way. And call it whatever you want, all right? We're calling it the hellish hustle here, but we know that it infects and it invades every part of our lives, and it finds its way into our souls. Maybe you talk about it as busy or frantic or frenetic, or maybe you just talk about a hectic life. Whatever name it goes by, it comes at a cost. And just off the top of my head this week, I was sort of reflecting on the things that we know that the hellish hustle causes, the cost of it. And the first was, which not, I don't say that this as as like this is the worst thing that it does, that it hurts your productivity, but I start there because I find it the most ironic. Because all the researchers will tell us that actually at some point after that, the top of that bell curve, your hustling is not actually producing more for you. It's actually hurting you. And we know this. The researchers tell us this. Tons of experts have told us this. And yet we still, our answer to life is always hustle more. And it's like, wait, why do we hustle? Because I want to accomplish more. I want to produce more. I want to get things done that I have to get done because the pressure is greater. So when the pressure gets greater, my solution is to run faster. When somebody walks alongside my treadmill and pushes the button up and makes it go faster and higher, I got to run through it. That's the next step for me. And yet we actually already know that it isn't increasing our productivity. You ever notice that if you sit down, if you're kind of a planner, and I am, and so on Thursdays, I usually try to plan the upcoming week, but sometimes that ends up happening on Sunday nights, and sometimes it happens on Monday mornings, but almost every time I sit down to plan the next week of activity and work, if I were to just simply add up everything that I wanted to accomplish, there's no physical way to actually accomplish it all. And somehow I accept that. Somehow I sit back and I go, well, if everything works out just perfect and everything takes less time than it ought to take or will take, forget emergencies, forget interruptions, forget any of that. If everything goes perfectly, I still need 3 days this week extra. I need a 10-day week. And this, what kind of insanity is it that we continue to work in this way? We also know that the hustle attacks the body. And we know this time and again, it's so obvious, it almost seems silly for me to highlight it. But it struck me again that we have such an obsession with our health. And yet, the one thing the experts keep telling us time and again and again and again is hurting us and impacting us and decreasing so many measures of health. It's the hustle, and yet we continue to do it. But how does that play with our obsession with health? Like if that were the only thing you really were, and how many times people say it, they're like, hey, as long as I have my health. Everything's good as long as I have my health. And then we actually live in such a way that it hurts our health. One of the books that we were reading for this series, he said that research showed that the people who are daily commuters in an urban center like London or New York, if you're a commuter in those areas, that your stress levels surpass that of a fighter pilot or of a riot cop. And so imagine that. If you want to take a step back from the craziness of your life, you have to become a fighter pilot because you'll have less stress that way. Or to find the nearest riot and go try to break it up. This is how our modern lives are impacting our bodies. And we all know it. At the end of a long day, long week, we end with nothing left in the tank. We're like, I just need to veg. I just need to veg. And that usually means just sort of staring aimlessly at a screen for a while because we're done. There's just nothing left in the tank. That's how we've structured it so that our bodies get just fully and completely exhausted. Researchers also tell us through neuroplasticity and kind of the new frontier of this whole brain research thing, that this kind of living actually rewires the circuitry in our brains. And so we're literally changing. If you were to scan brains from days and months and years ago, even your own brain after a whole lot of different types of repetitive sorts of activity, you'll actually see the structures of the brain changing. And most experts agree it isn't changing for the good. Maybe you find yourself regularly jiggling your knees or tapping your fingers or foot tapping or squirming or pacing back and forth while you're teaching. That could be something that you do as well. And I can't sit through a full meeting. I have to pace around. And you know who else does that? Addicts when they're withdrawing. Our physical bodies are responding to the way that we live. It robs our joy. Most researchers in this area will tie the hustle to a lack or a decrease in our joy, which is, again, one of these ironic things. What else are we committed to in life if not our ultimate and most and best happiness? And yet many of the decisions we make run counter to it. And there are countless research projects, books, and articles all extolling the value of slowing down and making space and creating margin and all of that. So vacations, right? Take vacations. They're supposed to be like little mini factories for joy, right? And so you go on a vacation, it's supposed to sort of refresh you and rebuild you. And sometimes it does. It normally takes you 2-3 days to settle into a vacation because you're wired, and so it takes you a little while to kind of actually, but what's the worst part about vacation? It's the week before and the week after. You take a week off, but you end up working 3 extra weeks somehow, and you don't really know how that happens. And so we watch as these things intrude into these little moments, these little rhythms of our life that were meant to be the little joy factories for us and sustain us and build us and refresh us. And now we're seeing even those things are starting to eke away from us. We run in these cycles where we start to feel it. We get worn down and we're like, man, something is just up, and I got to change something, this pace and this thing. I'm not happy. I'm feeling it. And when you're in the crisis, you're like, you make a decision. You're like, I have got to make changes. And you commit yourself to making those changes. But then the pressure kind of comes off for just a little bit and you go through another cycle and all of a sudden you're like, okay, I can breathe again. It's not so bad. So what changes did you implement? Nothing. You don't do anything because you're like, oh, I can breathe for like half a minute. And so now I'm good until, of course, the next cycle begins. But you haven't made any substantive life decisions, life changes that are going to get you off of this treadmill. And I think many of us, we start to lose the capacity. Just think this through. We lose the capacity to slow down. We're no longer even able to figure out how we would accomplish that. We also know that it kills love. It's been well said that you cannot love in a hurry. And relationships suffer there when we're plagued with this type of hurry sickness in our lives. And we often don't even realize it ourselves. Everyone else around us probably does. So it's a good thing you could ask people and find out, but like we don't even think about it. We're like, I'm more snippy, I'm more impatient. Generally, we blame the other people because they're stupid drivers or because they left that stuff out for me to take care of or because they're not carrying their fair share of the weight. So I have to carry my weight and their weight. And now this isn't right. And we get angry, we get snippier, we lose patience. We're losing our capacity to love. Often when you do get a chance to slow down, you start to notice things and you talk with people and you make friendships and you don't feel pressed upon by your neighbor, right? Your neighbor's outside and you're like, oh, look, a neighbor. And you go and you talk to a person and you're like, this is so great. When you have time, when you don't have time, you stay in your car until they cross over in front of your house so that you don't have to see them. Like my neighbor came up to me the other day and I was like, I'm on the I can't get out of my car. I didn't even roll the windows down but I was on the phone, but I was like, and I felt so bad. I had to go knock on his door afterwards. He's probably like, why are you knocking on my door? Because we're all feeling this similar sort of a thing. So if you're finishing people's sentences for them or in the midst of a conversation, you're like, yeah, yep, hurry up, come on. Can you talk a little bit faster? If you're feeling any of that, or if that is maybe the hurry in your life is starting to impact your capacity to love. If you sense that you're getting impatient when you have to wait for someone or something, or maybe, God forbid, you get interrupted. Oh, that's hard. That's hard. Why would people interrupt? Now, it's okay if I interrupt you, because that's important. Obviously, if I'm interrupting you, there's a reason I'm interrupting you, but you interrupting me, we forget about the people. Are people becoming obstacles to your goals rather than an opportunity to show the love of Jesus? And it saps your spiritual life. This is a hard one for us to kind of think about a little bit because we have these categories where we put regular life and spirit life and all of that thing. But if we just think in terms of your spiritual life and your practices and your vitality, there's this promise that God gives us that there can be such a richness in our relationship with him. There can be such beauty and there can be such power when you read through the scriptures and you look at the life of Jesus, you see all of this great stuff happening. And then in our own experience, it feels like we're settling. We're what do they say, 1,000 miles wide and an inch deep, right? We're just like skimming across the surface of the deeper, more important things that take place in the soul. Some friends here at the church invited us to go on vacation a while back, and we just got back a couple weeks ago. We were in Italy. Our first time in Europe. We had a great time, but one of the moments that stood out to us is we're in Italy. We're in Cinque Terre, at an Italian restaurant, and the owner chef is there. This is like why you go to Italy, right? Like this is like everything about it. It's the perfect scene. And so they bring bread out, and of course bread for me is the goal is to eat as much of it as you possibly can with all that. And so, but I'm not going to be like an American cretin. I'm not going to slather butter on it. I'm going to use some of their fancy olive oil. They have some balsamic, a little bit of salt, some pepper. Maybe if there's a little Parmesan, I kind of make this little mixture. And that shows that I'm sophisticated in the way that I'm going to scarf down the bread. And so, or at least this is what I thought. And so I was actually feeling pretty proud of myself that I wasn't like those other like horrible Americans. Well, this guy, the owner, chef of this very fancy restaurant, he walks over and he sees me making this concoction, and I kind of, I kind of got the like, we know. And he literally goes like this. He covers the, like he stands and he starts to be, he's being pushed away by something offensive. He covers it so that he cannot see my plate, and he literally says, no bread and balsamic. And I was like, that's me. So we went with Eddie and Megan, and so I pushed my plate away from me to them as if it were their plate, and but it was already too late. I was already caught. And he looked like he was offended. He was hurt. He was like, no. He goes, this is all you're going to taste is bread and balsamic. And he is so hurt. And then because all right, I'm paying for this. Stop insulting me. But then he doesn't care. And so he actually pleads with me at one point. He goes, if you're still hungry after the meal, I will bring you as much bread as you want. I was so embarrassed. But it made me think, why is he so, come on, because there's fresh seafood and there's incredible vegetable dishes and there's homemade pastas that he's about to bring out, and he's like, you're filling up on the bread. You're numbing your taste buds with vinegar. Just relax a second and let me put a spread in front of you that will delight you in every way. I feel like God is doing this. Sometimes it's God looking at my life and he's like, this is how you're using your time and your energy, and this is what you're going after. I almost feel like God's like, no, stop it. I have this awesome thing for you. I have a banquet prepared. He uses banquet language throughout the scriptures to talk about what it's like to be with him. It saps our spiritual lives, and I think it also hides the rot that is in our soul. And if you've ever had that sense that something is just not quite right, but you're scared to think about it, you're a little nervous, you don't want to slow down, and you don't want to really spend time. The idea of spending some solitude, some silence, some quiet, so doing some examining of your soul, it starts to quicken the heart a little bit. You start to think, no, I don't want to actually do that. I'm not really sure that's even a good idea, because if I start doing those kinds of things, what will I find? What's being hidden? What's being masked? What idols, deep idols in the soul, are causing us to make the kind of decisions that we're making? Often you will find that the hustle itself is being driven by lies that we have bought into, or there's patterns of sin and rebellion in our lives, and there's issues of greed that God wants to free us from, and there's these lusts, and there's this selfishness, self-centeredness, and God's like, I want to free you of these things. Just let's take some time and work on these deeper issues, these soul issues, and we're like, let me just keep running and self-medicating with a flurry of activity so that I don't have to do the hard work of moving closer into the image of Jesus. And God is saying all along, but this is where you'll find freedom. It's where you'll find freedom. Now, this isn't even an exhaustive list. This is just some thoughts and some observations about what this hellish hustle costs us. Now, if we want to send this hustle back to hell, then there are a couple things we get to learn from the life of Jesus. And the thing I want to start with is that, listen, I'm not saying, listen, you got to go be monks, you got to go live in the wilderness, you got to live in the desert for the rest of your lives, you got to cut the cord of your technology and all of that. I'm not saying any of that kind of stuff. Because Jesus absolutely knows how to hustle. When the work is so important that God sends Jesus to the planet to accomplish it, when the Father says, my beloved is going to come here and accomplish this work, you know the work is important. You know this thing matters for eternity. So work is good, and hard work is a gift. There's this one guy, he wrote a little book called Crazy Busy, Kevin DeYoung. He said, I don't want you to think that the best thing we can do for ourselves and for the world is to take a pass on every difficult request, live for leisure, and throw ourselves a giant me party. I don't want you to think that hard work is the problem, or that sacrificing for others is the problem, or that suffering is necessarily the problem. If you have creativity, ambition, and love, you will be busy. We're supposed to disciple the nations. We're supposed to work with our hands. We're supposed to love God with our minds. We're supposed to have babies and take care of them. It's not a sin to be busy. It's not wrong to be active. See, loving people is actually hard work, and it will drain us, and it will make us tired. And this is why what we'll need to figure out and need to develop are going to be the rhythms of work and rest. And that's one of the neat things that we got to see about Jesus, because as busy as he was, he carved out space for his soul. When you start to read the Gospel of Mark, it's a pretty fast, it's a fast-moving gospel. And we get to learn a whole lot about the way Jesus actually lived in a kind of day-to-day way. He says that, for instance, it says, when the Sabbath came, this is Mark chapter 1, the very, very beginning of the Gospel of Mark. When the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach, and the people were amazed at his teaching. So we know he was in the wilderness. We know that he's busy teaching people. Crowds start following him. A man in the synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Be quiet," Jesus said. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. Jesus is busy teaching. He's busy collecting his disciples. He's busy healing demoniacs. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. He's busy. He's got these crowds. He's got all these people clamoring. He's got there's one of his friends, the mother-in-law, sick. Jesus finds a time. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and the demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons. We have this picture that Jesus, he sees how fully, how completely, how engaged. He's busy. People are clamoring for him because he's good at what he does, and there's just so much to be done. And at the end of Mark chapter 1, we get to Mark 1:35, and we find out very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. He left the house and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. All of these outputs, all of this great stuff. He had to get up early in the morning. Why? Because everybody was going to be waiting for him. He had to get up with the roosters. He had to beat the clock in this sense. He had to get up in such a way because he knew how important it was for him to find a solitary place where he could be with the Father, where he could tend to his own soul, where he could get wisdom about what to do next and what his day and his life was going to be like and how his decisions were going to. I can assure you, if Jesus needed to carve out time for his soul, I do too. I'm pretty sure you do too. He found time. He carved out space. So why is it that we don't carve out time and space to tend to our own souls? Are we really convinced that we're doing something more important than that? That we're able to survive in this world in a way that Jesus wasn't able to, what Jesus needed, we don't need? Is that what we're trying to convince ourselves? That we're stronger than he was? Makes no sense. And yet we continue to do this. We also see that Jesus made time with his friends. And this is kind of a different idea here a little bit, because what we see is that and a whole lot more. The apostles gathered around Jesus. They reported to him all that he had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. Think about how busy it is when you ever feel like, oh man, I had to skip lunch today. Yep, they didn't have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Jesus, he himself went away to a solitary place. Now he's saying, my friends need it as well. And he went to go be with them. And one of the things we see about the life of Jesus, and it wasn't just simply that he make time to be with his friends, but that there were rhythms to his life. There were seasons of pace and seasons of space. There were these moments where he was very, very busy, and then moments where he wasn't busy. And there were moments where he was alone, and there were moments when he was with his friends. And there were moments when he was teaching, and there were moments when he wasn't teaching. And sometimes he would get up early, and sometimes he would sleep while the disciples were doing all of the work. And sometimes he would stay up late, sometimes all through the night. And other times you'd find him busy talking to an individual and giving them as much time as they seemed to have needed. There were rhythms in his life that made certain that he had time to do what it was that God was calling him to do. And that really is, to this point, is that he lived on mission but with intentionality. And this is an important part because there was a great deal of what that Jesus was doing and accomplishing, and yet everything was moving toward this greater goal and this cause. He knew what God was calling him to, and he would do whatever it was along the way that was in line with his mission, and he would do it with intentionality, meaning it wouldn't just simply always happen to him, but he would actually make decisions along the way in such a way that he could actually be interrupted. This is one of the neat things. He says, as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. This is such a neat moment because here he is teaching. He's surrounded by crowds. He already has some disciples, but he isn't so distracted by everything that he doesn't get to see Levi sitting there and go over and call him out as an individual. He's like, "Come on, Levi, you're with me now." Levi was a tax collector, despised, hated, loathed by so many. Certain the other disciples were like, "Oop, that was Jesus' first big misstep, going after and finding Levi." Levi is the one who gave us the Gospel of Matthew. This is not a small moment in the story of the life of the church over the last 2,000 years. This is a key moment. But here's what really got me. Not only does he find time to reach out to Levi, then it says, when Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. So now Jesus not only has time for Levi, he has time for a whole group of people, Levi's friends who are far from God, the outcasts of society. And Jesus is like, "No, man, those are the people I've come for. Of course I'm going to find time to be with them. How could I not?" All the while he was being criticized, which is really one of the great lessons that he tells us, because not only was he living his life with intentionality, he was willing to disappoint people. And I highlight this one because I think for many of us, this is one of the main reasons why the hustle owns us, and we don't own the hustle. Jesus was willing to disappoint people, whether it be the religious leaders, whether it be his family who thought he had lost his mind, his mother and his siblings. But there was this one example where after Jesus went off to a solitary place to pray, this one always strikes me. That after he was done in his solitary place and he was done praying, he came back, and Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Of course they are. He had just spent this time healing everybody and teaching them all this stuff. And so they all wake up in the morning. They're like, "Oh, we better get over there before Jesus gets going," only to find out that Jesus has already been going. He's already had time with the Father. He's already sought wisdom. He's already sought guidance. And of course, Simon's like, "We got to build on this momentum. That's the right strategy here. We got to there. Last night when we cut it off, there was still a long line of people looking for healings. And we told that woman, we said, "Hey, bring your kid back tomorrow. The master needs to get some sleep tonight. So come back in the morning. We'll put you at the front of the line." Simon's thinking about all of the responsibility that Jesus must do according to Simon. And then Jesus is like, "Yeah, no, guys, listen, it's time to go somewhere else, nearby villages, so we can preach there also. That's why I come." Simon would have been disappointed. The disciples would have been disappointed. All of the people still waiting for him would have been disappointed. And Jesus, because he's determined to live as God, his Father, had called him to live, he would live within his limits. And he kept this crazy pace, but he also created significant space. And because of this significant space that he created and his willingness to often have to disappoint people, we find out that his love wouldn't grow cold. Time and again, he's interrupted. Time and again. He never seemed to be in a hurry. Some people have described him as the most relaxed person in history, which is a hard thing for me to stomach. But when you read the scriptures, you start to see a kind of interruptibility, a willingness to let others' needs and problems and issues impact him, enter into his world, change his plans. This is all very hard for most of us to absorb. He said, for instance, Jesus left that place. He went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house. He didn't want anyone to know. Yet he couldn't keep his presence a secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. This is it. They're literally saying Jesus went. His plan was to be alone. His plan was to, and yet somehow in that moment when he's interrupted and a need presents, his compassion is moved. This happened again with the apostles at another place. The same thing. The apostles gathered around Jesus. They reported to him all that they had done. We already read this part. And because so many people were coming and going that he didn't even have the chance to eat, he said, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." And so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But that's not where that story ended. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion. They were like sheep without a shepherd. He began teaching them many things, and this is where he does the feeding of the 5,000. His heart was still moved. Somehow, in all of the busyness and in all of the work, his heart never grew cold. And if you're starting to get a sense that your heart is growing cold, this is something for us to embrace and to bring back to Jesus if we're getting to that place. And this is something we're seeing all over the place with American Christianity. It seems like the love of many is growing cold. Why? We're not making space for our hearts to be moved, to have compassion, to be struck in this sort of powerful way. This is always such an incredible balance. It takes such great wisdom. When am I supposed to be interrupted? When am I supposed to disappoint? When am I supposed? Yeah, these are real, and you can see these are already seemingly contradictory lessons, and yet it seems as if Jesus was able to stay so connected with the will of the Father and with the moment and with the Spirit's leading and prompting that he was able to move into what was supposed to be happening next and in a way and with the compassion that was supposed to be shown next. This to me is such an encouragement. And of course, it's also a great challenge. So you have a little sheet of paper there. I want you to take it out. We're going to take a few moments and do a little self-reflection here. This is for you to keep. You're not going to be turning this in or anyone showing it to anybody. This is a self-reflection exercise for you. With a little pen there, a little card on your chair. And this self-reflection starts with a simple question. How is the hellish hustle hurting you? How is it hurting you? So just take a few moments. And as I've been talking here this morning, maybe the Spirit has been kind of stirring up some things in your heart. Maybe you just thought about something and you were like, oh man, this is what I'm feeling. Maybe you feel like your body's starting to break down prematurely, or maybe you're finding more impatience or frustration. Maybe you're starting to see that your joy that used to be way up here has found a new low point, and you've been content with this low level of joy. Or maybe things seem to be going okay, but there's something missing. Maybe you feel like this hellish hustle is sort of going in there and sort of grow. So just write down one or two or three different things that kind of come to mind as we just take a moment, asking, how is the hustle hurting me? If we don't take just even a few moments to reflect on these things, we'll just keep rushing and running. And you came here this morning. I hope you came here because God is doing something and stirring your heart in some way, and you want to be with God's people, you want to worship, you want to invest in your spiritual life, and this is part of that investment. Be honest with yourself and with the Spirit. How is it hurting you? And then I want you to ask, why am I hustling? Why am I hustling? Now, I'm going to be asking you to do 2 or 3 levels of why am I hustling? Because your first answer or two will only be why you're hustling on the surface. But I think it's important for us to examine why it is that we're actually succumbing to the hellish hustle. You might say, well, I'm really busy because all of these people are clamoring for my attention. Well, what's behind that? Is it pride because you love being that person? Why am I responding to the clamoring of every single person around me? Well, maybe it's a people-pleasing thing. Maybe for you, this is how you find some sort of satisfaction or self-worth. Or maybe it's because of the way that you were raised. So don't answer with just my boss is a jerk. That's why I'm hustling. I mean, you can put that down because your boss may very well be a jerk. Unless you work here at the church. That's not true then. But you might be feeling that, right? You might be saying to yourself, all right, it's because my kids are so demanding, or it's because my parents are unreasonable. And that's, that may be true. That may be a part of it. But what is it about that's causing you to continue down that hustle? And you ask yourself this question, why, and then why that, and then why that. At least 3 levels of why are going to be needed for most of us to get at what's really going on, the deeper issues and the deeper idols that are in our hearts. Maybe there's a story that you're telling yourself, maybe one that your parents started for you. Or maybe it's the community that you grew up in, or maybe it was your friend group for a very long time. And they and you called things true that aren't true. Why are you pushing your kids so hard? We're so busy with all of the things that the kids are doing. Why? Well, because I have to. Why? Well, because they need every opportunity. Why? So they can live as crazy and hustled as you are? What's behind it? Maybe you're scared about the future. I need to save money. I need to get money in the bank. I need to start building my retirement, my nest egg. Why? Well, I have to do that in order to have a secure retirement. What kind of security? Well, financial security. Why? So we can do what? Travel. So I can get this. So I can not be dependent. So I can. What's driving that? There's a story. There's a belief system. There's a value set somewhere back there. What is it? Take a minute. Write some of those things down. And then where can you intentionally make space? This isn't just schedule, by the way. We're talking about space in far more comprehensive way. Everybody's going to need schedule space. They're going to need financial space. You might need relational space. You might need emotional space. Only you know where the hustle is most breaking you down. And we meet this Jesus, and he creates this space, and he lives his life within the human limits that God gave to him. And he says that this is good. So how can we create space? And creating space is, call it whatever you want. Call it rest, call it margin, it's the opposite of hustle, it's the opposite of clutter, and it will always continually try to creep back in to our lives. And so creating space is a conscious decision to unplug, unwind, untangle. Think of it as the space between the load that you have to carry in any of these areas of life and your actual limits. So just take a few moments. Where can I intentionally make space? I want to encourage each and every one of us, starting with me, to make a decision to get off the crazy go-round again and again and again, and to commit to creating space. Let me pray that the power of God would be involved in this for us. Lord, what we want is for you to do all of this and so much more in our hearts. We know that we have to do it. We know that we have to participate, but we also know, Father, that we have tried and we have failed. And we look to the life of Jesus and we see this man who lived with such incredible power. We see the God-man reflecting both the divine and humanity. We see this perfect joining. And we know, Lord, that what we need is divine power to live the way he lived. And so that's what we ask for. I pray, Lord, that you would stir up people's hearts and you would give them insight into their own lives and into their own values and into their own stories that they tell each other, that all of us, Father, together would commit ourselves to living the kinds of lives that the world could look at, that our family, our friends, our neighbors who are far from you could look at and say, that's the kind of a life that I want to know more about. That we would be an example and a model to people all around us every day of a different set of values that are rooted deep in our hearts, the power of the Spirit, that we might do all that you have for us. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen.